So imagine you're opening up your laptop right now just to look for a job.
Right, like on a typical job board.
Exactly. You've spent the last 4 years grinding through a degree, you've got this stellar resume, and you are totally ready to launch your career.
You're doing everything right.
Yeah. So you go to this major job site. I mean, let's say it's like the equivalent of LinkedIn today.
Okay.
But before you can even look at a single posting, the website actually forces you to click a button verifying your gender.
Oh, wow.
And depending on which button you click, half the database entirely vanishes.
Just gone.
Just gone. If you click female, all the management positions, the high-paying corporate tracks, basically any job with real upward mobility, it just disappears from your screen.
That is wild.
Right. You're just left staring at this really curated list of clerical roles, assistant jobs, things like that.
Stuff for the hard ceiling.
Exactly. And honestly, the craziest part of this whole thought experiment, you can't sue the platform.
Because it's legal.
Right. You can't call a regulatory agency. The federal government has officially reviewed this practice and declared it perfectly legal.
I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel. Or maybe, a look back at the Victorian era or something.
Yeah, totally.
But the reality is actually far more jarring than that. Because that wasn't a glitch, and it wasn't centuries ago.
Yeah.
That was the legally sanctioned everyday reality right here in the United States in 1971.
And that is exactly the world we are stepping into today. I was recently going through the research dossier for this new historical series.
The one called 37 Words, the story of Title Nice, right?
Yes, exactly. And there's the specific section in the dossier that details everyday life just before that law was passed. And honestly, reading through it completely rewired how I view historical discrimination.
How so?
Well, I think we usually picture civil rights struggles as these incredibly loud, highly visible battles.
Protests in the streets.
Right. Picket lines, people chaining themselves to fences, gavels banging furiously in courtrooms. You expect a loudly debated battlefield.
Right, a lot of friction.
Yeah. But the dossier reveals a reality that was just chillingly quiet.
And that quietness is really the most crucial part of this history. We are exploring a form of systemic exclusion that didn't usually look like a fight.
Because it was just the norm.
Exactly. It was just considered the architecture of the room.
Yeah.
I mean, the institutions, the time schools, universities, big employers,
Yeah.
they didn't view themselves as actively oppressing anyone.
Right. They thought they were just operating normally.
Right. Instead, they made these very specific, culturally ingrained predictions about what a woman's life would look like.
Like predicting she'd just get married and leave.
Right. They predicted she would eventually prioritize marriage, drop out of the workforce to raise kids, and, falter under high-pressure environments.
Uh-huh.
And then, rather than letting individual lives actually play out to see if those predictions were true, they built rigid rules to guarantee those outcomes.
Yeah.
They essentially engineered a massive nationwide self-fulfilling prophecy.
A self-fulfilling prophecy. That is such a great way to frame it, and we are going to completely deconstruct how that prophecy was engineered, mechanism by mechanism today.
That was good.
But I think to understand this massive national machine, we really need to start with one single tiny gear.
Okay, where are we starting?
We're not starting in the halls of Congress, and we're not at the Supreme Court. We're actually starting on the water.
Oh, the rowing story.
Yes. So it's a fall of 1969. I want you to picture a college freshman named Nick McKenzie. He's at Stanford University, and he's out on a long, narrow rowing shell.
Out on the water.
Right. Now, according to the student newspaper at the time, the Stanford Daily, the crew team wasn't exactly the pride of the athletic department.
They weren't bringing in the big crowds.
No, not at all. The dossier actually explicitly quotes the paper, calling it not a prestige sport.
Right.
So this was a low-budget, gritty operation. They didn't have the glamour of the football team. But more importantly, they were chronically short on bodies.
And in an 8-oared cruise shell, the absolute hardest body to find is the coxswain.
Which is such a specific role.
It really is. I mean, if you aren't familiar with rowing mechanics, the coxswain is the person sitting in the stern of the boat.
Facing the rowers, right.
Exactly. Facing the rowers. And they do not touch an oar.
Right.
Their job is entirely mental and tactical. They steer the shell, they monitor the pacing, and they call out the rhythm for the 8 rowers.
They're like the brain of the boat.
That's a great way to put it. And from a physics standpoint, a cruise shell is all about the power-to-weight ratio. The rowers need to be massive powerhouses.
Big, tall guys.
Yeah. But the coxswain is dead weight in terms of propulsion.
Oh, right, because they aren't rowing.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So the role actively punishes size. You need someone with a very light physical frame, but a massive, sharp, commanding voice.
And the Stanford men's team is really struggling to find guys who fit that very specific description.
It's a tough combo.
It is. So looking for a practical solution, women from Nick's class step up. They fit the physical requirements perfectly.
They're light, they can project their voices.
Exactly. So they climb into the boat, and the dossier notes that on Tuesday afternoons during practice, they do the job flawlessly.
Which is no small feat.
No, imagine the scene. I mean, it's a grueling Tuesday practice, muscles are burning, the water is choppy, and these women are sitting in the stern, steering the boat, calling the stroke, executing the tactical role exactly as it needs to be done.
They are putting in the exact same cold, miserable hours on the water as the men.
They are totally part of the machine. The boat moves seamlessly, the physics work, the tactics work.
Until Saturday.
Until race day.
Right. On Saturday, the entire dynamic abruptly shifts.
It's so crazy.
It is. The rules of the era just come crashing down on the dock. These women, who have learned the rhythm of their rowers, who steered the practice shells perfectly all week, they are suddenly barred from getting in the boat.
Just completely banned.
Yes. The official rules dictated that a woman could practice on a Tuesday, but she was strictly forbidden from competing in an official capacity on a Saturday.
Wait, I really want to pull this apart for a second, because on a mechanical level, this makes absolutely zero sense.
It defies logic.
Completely. If the concern was physical, how does the day of the week change the physics of rowing?
It doesn't.
Right. The water doesn't know it's a Saturday race instead of a Tuesday practice. A
Yeah.
coxswain isn't going to drown less on a Tuesday.
No, the physical toll of calling a 2-hour grueling practice is identical to calling a race.
Exactly. So if they were capable on Tuesday, they were obviously capable on Saturday. So the ban couldn't possibly be about their actual ability to do the job.
It had absolutely nothing to do with capability or physical danger. And Nick McKenzie realized that.
He saw right through it.
He did. As a freshman watching this unfold, he saw the glaring contradiction. He watched his teammates get pulled from the boat simply because the calendar flipped to the weekend, and he thought it was fundamentally wrong.
Which it was.
Right. So he actually spoke up. He objected to the ban. But the response he received is just incredibly telling about the era.
Yeah, he doesn't get pulled into a debate about the rules, does he?
Not at all. He isn't met with a logical counterargument. No one breaks out a chalkboard to explain why the women can't row.
Right, there's no technical discussion.
No. Instead, he just hits a wall. He collides with the immense, settled weight of the way things are.
It's just a collective institutional shrug.
Exactly. The establishment was simply the establishment.
Huh.
And Nick, he was just an 18-year-old freshman.
What could he do?
Right. Feeling completely powerless against that invisible architecture, he backed down. He let it go. The women stayed on the dock. The men rowed the race. It was just another unremarked upon Saturday in American sports.
Wow. It's really the equivalent of like an understudy rehearsing a play for 6 weeks, learning every single line, blocking every scene perfectly.
Yeah, putting in all the work.
And then on opening night, the theater manager just locks the doors and says, "Sorry, people like you aren't allowed to be seen on stage."
That's a perfect analogy.
Because that's the real difference between Tuesday and Saturday, isn't it? Tuesday is private. It's in the shadows.
Tuesday's practice.
Right. But Saturday is public. Saturday is when the crowds show up.
And that is the vital distinction here. Practicing on a random Tuesday afternoon when no one is watching was deemed perfectly acceptable because it was a supportive role.
They were just helping the men.
Exactly. The women were helping the men train. It fits neatly into the era's expectation of behind-the-scenes female assistance.
Ah, I see.
But a Saturday race, that is a public contest. It involves institutional prestige, representing the university, the glory of victory, and public status.
And that changes everything.
It does. In the societal architecture of 1971, the arena of public prestige was a strictly protected male domain.
You know, this single memory from Stanford, it really feels like a Rosetta Stone for the whole era.
It really does.
Nick's experience on the water isn't just some quirky sports anecdote. It's a doorway into understanding a massive national psychology. Because the rule that pulled those women out of the boat wasn't an anomaly.
Not at all.
It was standard operating procedure everywhere. And to really grasp the scale of this, we have to look at the sheer numbers surrounding American athletics at the time.
The statistics from the dossier paint a stark picture of just how completely that door was bolted.
Yeah.
So let's look at the data from 1971.
Okay.
The National Federation of State High School Associations, which is the governing body for high school sports, they conducted its very first participation survey that year.
So this is right before Title IX.
Exactly. This is the baseline data for the country. And across the entire United States, there are roughly 3.7 million boys playing high school sports.
3.7 million. I mean, that's a massive cultural institution.
It's huge.
That's generations of boys learning teamwork, leadership, dealing with pressure, experiencing public victory and defeat.
All of those foundational experiences, yes.
So what about the girls? What was their number?
On the girls' side of the ledger, a mere 294,000.
Wait, 294,000?
That's it.
Against 3.7 million.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. That is a chasm. That is a more than 12-to-1 gap in participation.
It's staggering. And we actually have to look closely at what those 294,000 girls were doing, because they weren't spread evenly across a wide variety of athletic disciplines like the boys were.
They didn't have all the options.
No. The opportunities that did exist were highly concentrated in just a few specific sports, primarily basketball and track.
Okay.
And even then, they were often played under heavily modified rules designed to minimize exertion.
Like they couldn't run full court or something?
Exactly like that. Furthermore, let's say a young woman happened to be an elite athlete within that tiny 294,000 cohort, and she wanted to leverage her talent to pay for college.
Right, get a scholarship.
Athletic scholarships for women were practically non-existent.
Wow. So there's no reward for being great?
None. The entire system of upward mobility through sports, the scholarships, the recruitment, the alumni networks, it was completely closed off. The infrastructure simply was not built for them.
Which really brings us back to the question of why. Like, how did society rationally justify a 12-to-1 gap in athletic participation?
They needed a reason.
Yeah, if you were a school board member or a high school principal in 1971, you can't just stand up and say, we don't like girls.
No, you need a socially acceptable rationale.
Right. So what was the rationale they used?
The rationale was rooted in a deeply entrenched folk belief that basically masqueraded as medical science.
Pseudoscience.
Exactly. The prevailing, very loudly voiced argument of the time was that hard, sustained competition was not just unfeminine, but genuinely medically dangerous for the female body.
Medically dangerous.
Yes. There was a widespread pseudoscientific consensus that intense athletic strain would literally damage reproductive organs or cause permanent physiological harm.
But again, this is where the Stanford rowing story completely exposes the lie of the era, doesn't it?
It tears it apart.
The medical argument collapses the second you apply any basic logic to it. Because if a high school principal genuinely believed that running a full-court basketball game or, rowing a heavy shell would physically destroy a young woman's body, then why allow her to row the grueling 2-hour Tuesday practice?
Right. The logic falls apart.
You don't let someone do something physically destructive just because it's a weekday.
No, of course not.
The contradiction proves the rule. The prohibition was never about protecting women's bodies from physical harm. It was about protecting the social order from the sight of women competing and winning.
It was entirely about boundary maintenance. The society of 1971 was deeply invested in maintaining distinct, separate spheres of operation.
Separate spheres?
Yes. Men competed, women supported. Men sought public victory, women provided private stability.
And sports threatens that.
Absolutely. If you allow women to cross that boundary on the athletic field, if you allow a crowd to see a woman push through pain, strategize a victory, and stand on a podium, you start to erode the narrative that she is inherently fragile and suited only for the domestic sphere.
Wow.
So the medical danger myth was just a highly convenient, socially acceptable veneer used to enforce a cultural boundary.
This is where I think we really need to connect the playing field to the rest of the world.
It all bleeds together.
It does, because if society is willing to enforce a 12-to-1 gap in high school sports based on this idea that women need to be protected from the rigors of competition, they are inevitably going to apply that exact same logic to the economy.
Unavoidably.
The athletic field is really just the training ground for the workforce. If you are barred from the Saturday race, you are going to be barred from the corner office.
Precisely.
Which brings us right back to our opening thought experiment. Let's step off the water, get out of the high school gymnasium, and look at how people actually found work.
To understand the workforce of the late 1960s and early 1970s, you really have to look at the literal paper trail. The visual reality of job hunting was astonishingly blatant.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted a job back then, you obviously didn't have the internet.
right? No online job boards.
You went out to your driveway, you picked up the Sunday newspaper, poured a cup of coffee, and opened the classified section.
The Sunday paper was everything.
But the pages weren't categorized by industry like healthcare or finance or whatever. The pages were physically, literally divided by gender.
It's hard to even picture now.
It is. The giant, bold-faced headings at the top of the columns literally read, "Help wanted male" and "Help wanted female."
And this wasn't a subtle sorting mechanism, and it certainly wasn't an equal division of labor. The structure of those columns dictated the entire trajectory of a person's life.
Right. So what was under the male column?
Under the Help Wanted Male heading, a job seeker would find the management trainee positions. They would find the career tracks in finance, engineering, and sales.
Career.
Yes. These are the roles that offered professional development, regular salary increases, and a clear path to the executive level.
And under the Help Wanted Female heading, what did that column look like?
It was an entirely different economic universe. The female column was dominated by clerical work, secretarial positions, telephone operators, and entry-level retail.
Very specific types of jobs.
Exactly. These were jobs with hard ceilings. They offered very little, if any, path for advancement. You could be the most brilliant, hyper-competent secretary in the firm, essentially running the entire office.
And doing all the real work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the newspaper had already predetermined that you would never be invited into the management training program. The division of labor was printed daily and delivered to millions of doorsteps.
See, this is where the legal history gets incredibly complex and, frankly, a bit mind-boggling for me.
It's a tangled web.
Because I think a lot of people listening might be doing the mental math right now and thinking, wait a minute, 1971, what about the 1964 Civil Rights Act?
Right, exactly.
That act was supposed to be the monumental watershed legislation that banned discrimination in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So how on earth were major metropolitan newspapers legally printing segregated job columns years after that law was passed?
It's a fascinating look at how administrative agencies can actually blunt the force of legislation.
Okay, tell me about that.
So, following the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the federal government created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC.
Right, the agency we still have today.
Yes. And their entire mandate was to enforce the new civil rights law. But when it came to the specific issue of sex discrimination, the early EEOC took a highly permissive stance.
Really?
Yeah. In 1965, the EEOC issued a formal ruling regarding those help wanted ads. They actually declared that sex-segregated newspaper columns were legally permissible.
That is just staggering. I mean, the very agency created to tear down discriminatory barriers essentially looks at a wall explicitly dividing the workforce by gender and says, yes, this wall seems fine, keep it up.
That's pretty much what happened.
How did they justify that legally? How do you get around the Civil Rights Act?
They leaned heavily on a specific exception written into the Civil Rights Act known as the BFOQ.
What does that stand for?
It stands for a bona fide occupational qualification. The law allowed for discrimination if a specific gender was deemed reasonably necessary to the normal operation of that particular business.
Okay, I think I know what that is. The classic example is like hiring a male actor to play a male role in a movie.
Right, exactly. That's a legitimate BFOQ. But in 1965, the EEOC interpreted this exception incredibly broadly when it came to newspapers.
How so?
They argued that the segregated columns were merely a convenience for the readers, a way to quickly sort through jobs that culturally appealed to one gender or the other.
A convenience.
Yes, they essentially codified cultural norms as legal qualifications.
It's the ultimate institutional passivity. They see a cultural bias, and instead of challenging it, they just enshrine it in the rules.
Exactly.
But this didn't go unchallenged, did it? People must have fought back.
Oh, absolutely. It sparked immense outrage among women's rights advocates. Organizations like the National Organization for Women, or now W, they saw the EEOC's 1965 ruling as a profound betrayal of the Civil Rights Act.
Which it was.
Right. They recognized that as long as the job market was visually and structurally divided, economic equality was impossible. So they organized protests, they flooded the EEOC with complaints, and eventually they launched formal legal action.
Good for them.
The pressure was relentless. And finally, in August of 1968, the EEOC was forced to reverse its position. They issued new guidelines stating that sex-segregated job ads were indeed illegal under the Civil Rights Act, except in those very rare, genuine BFOQ cases.
But even with that 1968 reversal, the dossier points out that the practice didn't just vanish overnight.
No, it lingered.
It persisted in various forms and in various local papers for years. Which makes me think about the psychological toll of this entire system. Think about the messaging.
The daily impact of it.
Yeah. Imagine a 10-year-old girl in 1969 sitting at the breakfast table looking over the newspaper while her parents read.
Just a kid absorbing the world.
Right. Long before she is old enough to fill out a job application, long before she even starts dreaming about what she wants to be when she grows up, she is handed a printed, government-sanctioned list of what she is absolutely not allowed to do.
And that is the insidious nature of structural exclusion. It doesn't just block a physical opportunity, it shrinks the imagination entirely.
It limits what you even dream of.
Yes. When the lock on the door is visual, tangible, and printed in black and white every single day, it normalizes the exclusion entirely. It sends a daily subliminal message. Do not bother aiming higher than this specific column of text. The architecture of the room becomes the architecture of the mind.
And if you are a young girl who internalizes that message, who accepts that the management track just isn't for you, it completely changes how you approach your education.
It dictates your path.
But it wasn't just the students internalizing it, was it? The schools themselves were looking at that newspaper, too.
Oh, absolutely.
If the job market is strictly segregated, the educational institutions, the very places that are supposed to expand horizons and cultivate potential, they're going to adapt to serve that market.
They fall in line.
They took it upon themselves to actively funnel students into those predetermined columns.
The academic funneling was systemic, and it started very early. We see a nationwide pattern in schools where girls were systematically steered away from the pathways of power and influence.
Right?
It wasn't always a hard ban. Often, it was the heavy hand of the guidance counselor or the structure of the curriculum itself. Girls were actively pushed away from classes like shop, advanced mathematics, and the hard sciences.
The exact foundational courses you need if you want to become an engineer, an architect, a computer scientist, or an innovator.
Exactly.
If you are denied access to the foundation, you can never build the house.
Precisely. The dossier notes that certain fields were broadly treated by educators as simply unsuitable for young women. Instead of calculus or drafting, girls were nudged, steered, or outright required to take home economics.
So, baking and sewing.
They were taught typing, cooking, and sewing. The educational system was basically functioning as a sorting mechanism. They were reverse engineering the help wanted female column right there in the middle school hallways.
Wow.
They were ensuring that when these girls graduated, they would only be qualified for the exact clerical and domestic roles society expected them to fill.
It's treating education not as exploration, but as manufacturing. You are manufacturing a workforce to fit a discriminatory template.
That's a great way to put it.
But, the curriculum steering, as damaging as it was, isn't even the most shocking part of the school environment for me. There is a detail in the dossier about how schools handled student behavior that is just breathtaking to read today.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
It involves the ultimate form of academic exclusion.
You're referring to the policies surrounding marriage and pregnancy.
Yes. If a high school student became pregnant, she wasn't just given a leave of absence or alternative schooling. In many districts, she could be expelled outright.
It's completely removed.
Pushed completely off the educational path. And even more surprisingly, in some places, a student could be expelled simply for getting married, regardless of pregnancy.
It was a total unceremonious removal from the educational system. The justification was often framed around morality or, protecting the other students from a bad influence.
Which is just wild to think about.
But the practical effect was a devastating derailment of a young woman's life.
Think about how perfectly this closes the loop. This is the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly.
You start by telling a young girl she is primarily suited for the kitchen and the nursery. You actively refuse to teach her the advanced math or science she would need to break out of that mold. You constantly signal that her ultimate goal should be marriage.
You set the trap.
Right. And then when she actually follows that societal expectation, gets married or gets pregnant, you punish her by kicking her out of school entirely, ensuring she has no diploma and no earning power.
And then they point to the results.
Yes. Then the gatekeepers of society look at the landscape and say, look at the data. Women just naturally don't become mathematicians. They naturally don't finish their advanced education. It's just the way they are.
That mechanism is the absolute core theme of this entire pre-Title IX era. You have summarized it perfectly. Institutions made rigid predictions about what a woman's life cycle would be.
Huh.
They predicted she would marry young, she would prioritize a husband over a career, she would drop out, and she would falter under academic rigor. But instead of letting life happen, instead of seeing what individual ambitious women were actually capable of doing, the institutions enforced those predictions as laws and policies.
They made sure it happened.
By expelling the married student, by barring the female coxswain on Saturday, by hiding the management jobs, they guaranteed the exact outcomes they claimed to be merely observing. They built a cage, pointed to the people inside and said, see, they don't want to fly.
Man, it's a closed loop of logic that must have stifled millions of brilliant minds.
Millions.
But we also know that human resilience is a powerful thing. Despite the steering, despite the home economics requirements, despite the cultural messaging of the newspapers, some women fought through it.
They always do.
Some demanded to take the advanced biology classes, they ignored the guidance counselors, they kept their heads down, and they pushed forward into higher education.
And they succeeded academically.
But the tragic part of this story is that for the women who managed to navigate that high school funnel, who survived the sorting mechanism, an even harder, colder barrier awaited them at the very top.
The apex of the academic world.
Yeah.
The elite professional schools. This is where the funnel becomes a literal bottleneck, controlled by quotas.
Right. Let's look at the statistics of exclusion at the highest levels, specifically focusing around the year 1972, so right on the eve of Title IX.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
Now, you might assume from everything we've discussed that college campuses were entirely male, but that actually wasn't the case. Women were attending undergraduate colleges in pretty significant numbers. Nationwide, they made up roughly 42% of college undergraduates.
Though we need to add a massive asterisk to that 42% figure.
Oh, why is that?
As the dossier highlights, simply getting into a university often required a woman to clear a significantly higher bar than her male peers.
It wasn't an even playing field.
Not at all. Admissions officers routinely scrutinized female applicants with intense skepticism. They were operating on the persistent assumption that a woman would eventually drop out to get married, thereby wasting the university's time and resources.
There's that prediction again.
Exactly. As a result, many colleges required women to have higher standardized test scores and better high school grade point averages than men, just to be considered for admission.
Okay, so to put it plainly, the women sitting in a freshman lecture hall in 1971 were, on average, academically superior to the men sitting next to them.
Statistically, yes.
That 42% represents a highly vetted, overperforming group of students who had already survived the high school funnel and beaten a stacked admissions game.
Exactly. Now, observe what happens when those high-performing, hyper-qualified women graduate and try to enter the elite, highly compensated professions, specifically law and medicine.
This is where the numbers fall off a cliff.
They really do.
Women made up 42% of undergraduate students. But in 1972, they earned only about 7% of U.S. law degrees and only 9% of U.S. medical degrees.
We go from near parity at the undergraduate level down to single digits at the professional level. The drop-off is staggering.
It's massive.
And as historical analysts, we have to look closely at the mechanism of that drop-off. How was that drastic reduction actually achieved? Because given the academic hurdles those women had already cleared, we know for a fact it wasn't a lack of aptitude.
Right, they were the best students.
And given the number of applications, it certainly wasn't a lack of interest.
So if it's not aptitude and it's not interest, how did these prestigious medical and law schools legally and administratively keep the numbers at 7 and 9%? Did they have like an official policy?
They used a very blunt instrument. Quotas.
Just strict quotas.
Yes. Many of the nation's elite medical and law schools simply instituted strict caps on the number of women they would admit. They held women to a small, fixed share of each incoming class. We're often talking about a handful of physical seats. The dossier notes that these caps were frequently held rigidly around the 10% mark.
So an admissions committee is sitting around a mahogany table looking at a stack of applications. They admit their 5 or 10 women for the year, hitting their 10% quota. And then what? They just throw the rest of the female applications in the trash, regardless of how brilliant they are.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Once that artificial cap was reached, the door slammed completely shut. A woman could have flawless test scores, impeccable recommendations, and a burning desire to practice medicine. But if she was the 11th woman applying for 10 allocated spots, she was rejected.
Just out of luck.
The institutions were artificially engineering the demographics of the medical and legal professions to ensure they remained overwhelmingly male.
You know, I want to move from the abstract statistics to a human reality. Because it's one thing to hear 10% quota, and it's another thing entirely to be the person hitting that wall.
Absolutely.
The dossier provides a specific, incredibly powerful story that puts a face to these devastating numbers. It's the story of Patsy Takemoto Mink.
Her trajectory is a masterclass in understanding how these barriers altered the course of American history.
Yeah, many people listening might recognize the name Patsy Mink. She became a towering figure in American politics. She was a congresswoman from Hawaii. She was the very first woman of color ever elected to the United States Congress. And beautifully enough for this story, she was the primary author and sponsor of Title IX itself.
She is an absolute icon.
But long before she was writing federal civil rights legislation, she was just a young, brilliant undergraduate student who wanted to be a doctor.
Medicine was her initial dream. She had the intellect, she had the drive, and she had the academic record.
So she starts applying to medical schools, and the rejections start rolling in. She is rejected by a dozen different medical schools. And the dossier makes something painfully clear. This was not a case of polite, vague rejection letters saying, oh, we had a highly competitive applicant pool this year.
No, no. These schools did not hide their reasoning.
They had no reason to.
They had no legal or cultural reason to hide it.
Right. They stated it plainly in their letters to her. They looked at her stellar application and essentially wrote back, you are a woman, we do not want you.
Just brutal honesty.
They rejected her explicitly and solely based on her gender. Because of those rigid quotas, because she hit that bolted door over and over again, she was forced to pivot her entire life's ambition away from medicine. She eventually turned to the law, which is how she ended up in politics.
Which ironically positioned her to dismantle the very system that rejected her.
Right. Talk about poetic justice.
But while her personal pivot resulted in a monumental political career, we have to pause and consider the massive invisible tragedy hidden in her story.
The sheer loss of human capital nationwide. I mean, Patsy Mink became a trailblazing congresswoman. Imagine what kind of doctor she would have been.
Exactly.
Imagine the research she might have conducted, the lives she might have saved, the medical innovations she might have spearheaded. Now, multiply that loss by thousands.
It's hard to fathom.
Think of the thousands of brilliant women over the decades who were handed those exact same rejection letters and didn't find a path to Congress. Women who just quietly folded their dreams away and took a clerical job from the Help Wanted column because the 10% quota was already full.
That is the true cost of the quota system. It's an incalculable loss of talent, intellect, and progress.
Which brings us to the most difficult, but perhaps the most necessary part of our analysis today.
Okay, where are we going?
How did the people running these institutions justify this? How did a dean of admissions at a prestigious medical school look at an application from someone as brilliant as Patsy Mink, write a letter saying no women allowed, and then go home, eat dinner with his family, and sleep soundly at night? Because to understand history, we have to look at the logic of the gatekeepers.
We must. And I want to be very clear here as we analyze this. If we just dismiss them as mustache-twirling villains operating out of pure malice, we miss the entire structural lesson of the era.
Right. We have to report on what they actually believed.
Exactly. To the gatekeepers of 1971, these quotas weren't acts of cruelty. They believed they were upholding the fundamental bedrock of American society. They believed they were acting responsibly.
So let's examine their sincere defenses. Let's impartially look at the arguments from the source material that made the locked doors seem so normal, so necessary, that almost nobody questioned them. When you read the historical counter-arguments in the dossier, what is the foundational logic they use to defend keeping women out of law and medicine?
The foundational logic almost always rested on the economic concept of scarce resources.
Scarce resources. Okay.
Right. An elite medical school or a prestigious law school only has so many seats, so many microscopes, so many professors. The defenders of the era argued that the primary responsibility of society was to ensure the economic stability of the family unit.
The family unit being the priority.
Yes, and in their rigid worldview, the man was the unquestioned, designated breadwinner. Therefore, it was a matter of societal survival that these scarce, highly coveted professional seats be allocated to the people who would use them for a full working life to support a wife and children.
So the logic being that if you give a medical school seat to a woman, you are essentially wasting a scarce resource because she is inevitably going to quit medicine the moment she gets pregnant.
That was the belief.
And by taking that seat, she has robbed a man of his ability to provide for his family.
Precisely. They viewed a woman's professional ambition as a temporary detour before her true calling of motherhood. And this economic argument dovetailed perfectly with the ideology of separate spheres that we discussed earlier regarding the high school sports.
Right, the distinct roles.
Yes, the defenders argued that these distinct roles for men and women weren't oppressive constructs. They sincerely believed they were reflections of divine order or unalterable biological reality.
So the protection argument comes back in full force here.
It does. They argued that keeping women out of high-pressure corporate boardrooms, grueling medical residencies, or adversarial courtrooms was a profound act of care.
Wow.
They genuinely believed that the public, professional world was a harsh, corrosive environment and that women possessed a delicate moral and physical constitution that needed to be shielded from that strain.
So they're locking the door to the medical school, but telling themselves they are actually building a protective fortress.
That's how they justified it.
And how did they respond when reformers started suggesting that maybe the federal government should step in and mandate equal opportunity? What was the defense against legislation?
The defense against federal intervention was deeply rooted in American concepts of autonomy and local control.
States' rights.
Exactly. The argument was that the family unit, not a federal bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., should be the ultimate arbiter of a child's path. If a traditional family wanted to raise their daughter to be a homemaker and a mother, they felt the government had no business forcing local schools to offer equal athletic or academic opportunities that contradicted those local traditional values.
It's the classic states' rights and local governance argument applied directly to gender. They feared that sweeping anti-discrimination rules would destroy the autonomy of local school boards and the traditional prerogatives of private universities to curate their own student bodies.
They felt they were defending the American way of life against federal overreach.
You know, if you are listening to this, I want you to try a brief, challenging empathy exercise. I want you to place yourself entirely in the year 1971.
Just immerse yourself in that era.
Right. You have grown up surrounded by a culture, a media landscape, a religious environment, and an educational system that all mutually reinforce these exact arguments.
It's everywhere.
Every authority figure in your life genuinely tells you that these rules are good. They tell you that quotas ensure men can provide for their families. They tell you that excluding women from the strain of competition protects their health. They tell you that keeping the federal government out of local schools protects American freedom.
It's a cohesive worldview.
If that is the only water you have ever swum in, if that is the only air you have ever breathed, you can start to understand why the lock on the door was completely invisible to them. It wasn't malice, it was just gravity.
And it's vital to understand that sincerity because only by understanding their logic can we definitively expose its fatal flaw.
The flaw in the system.
Yes, the entire massive architecture of 1971, the newspaper columns, the high school funnels, the medical school quotas, it rested entirely on untested assumptions.
Untested assumptions.
Yes. They built an entire civilization based on what they assumed women could or would do, but they fiercely guarded the doors so that those assumptions could never be tested by reality.
They never actually let them try.
They assumed the female coxswain couldn't handle the pressure of the Saturday race, but they never let her race to find out.
They assumed a girl in the home economics class couldn't handle advanced physics, but they wouldn't let her enroll in the class to prove them wrong.
They assumed a brilliant woman like Patsy Mink would eventually drop out of a medical career to raise children, but instead of giving her the seat and watching what she actually achieved, they rejected her at the door.
Wow.
The system protected its own logic by actively denying entry to anyone who possessed the talent and the drive to shatter the assumptions. It was an intellectual closed loop enforced by institutional power.
Which brings us all the way back, full circle, to the water.
To Stanford.
Right. I want to take you back to that brisk fall afternoon in 1969, to Nick Mackenzie, that 18-year-old freshman sitting in the Stanford cruise shell. He is staring right at the physical manifestation of those untested assumptions.
He's watching it happen.
He watches his female teammates, the ones who steered the practices flawlessly all week, get ordered off the dock. He sees the glaring flaw in the logic. He speaks up.
And hits the wall.
He hits the invisible, immovable wall of the establishment. And feeling the weight of the entire societal architecture against him, he lets it go. The boat rows away. The establishment won that Saturday. The way things were remained the way things were.
And, the dossier deliberately pauses the rowing story right there on the dock in 1969. It leaves it unresolved,
Oh, really?
but it drops a very subtle, fascinating hint for the future. It notes that decades later, this specific thread, the seemingly minor, quiet injustice on a college crew team, eventually finds its way to a conclusion that is truly remarkable.
Wow.
It resolves in a way that none of those students standing on the dock that day could have ever possibly imagined.
Well, we will have to dive into the rest of the historical series to find out exactly where that Stanford crew thread leads and how it connects to the broader revolution. But for our mission today, what we've unpacked is the
A
baseline.
starting point.
We've explored the everyday American world of 1971, a world defined by self-fulfilling prophecies, by devastating professional quotas, by physically segregated opportunity, and most chillingly, by the quiet, unremarked acceptance of it all.
It was a world that felt permanent to the people living in it. But as we know, it was a world standing directly on the precipice of a massive, systemic rewiring.
Change was coming.
Because in just a very short time, 37 words of a new federal law were about to strike the foundation of that invisible architecture.
You know, we have the luxury of looking back at 1971 from the vantage point of today. From here, we can easily see the obvious, glaring locks on the doors. We see the absurdity of the newspaper columns, physically divided by gender.
It's so clear now.
We see the profound injustice of the medical school quotas telling a young Patsy Mink to abandon her dreams. We see them clearly because the passage of time and the work of reformers have highlighted them for us. But looking at the past should always be a mirror for the present. So here is a thought to carry with you today. What predictions is our society making about people right now that we are quietly enforcing as rules? What locks are built into our modern architecture, entirely invisible to us, just waiting for someone to finally look at them and ask why they are there? Think about that next time you encounter the way things are. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.